was standing ready. Lord, please, I could take a guess. Oh, would you please? We are ready. I'm lifted by the Spirit's peace. I guess we're never going home. Never journey St. John. Could never be alone. Well, I guess I'm well adjusted, but the pains they never leave, except for my feet. I keep my arms in my suitcases and my shoulders halfway down to the ground.
Hello humans, welcome back to the Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. You are here with the boss.
The boss is coming!
That's a made up dumb fairy tale name, you
This is January 10th, and we are coming at you from Vancouver, BC. Thanks so much to my buddy Axel Boss for the intro there, bringing us in. He's floating around town doing shows and whatnot. We are coming at you again on the weekend with a full episode of the Slackline. Back with JWoww, and we'll be chatting some just some going-ons about the world. You know, return back to the sex scandal that won't stop, and we'll talk about maybe some potential President Oprah Winfrey talk that's been going on over the last week or so. So stay tuned for that. That will be out on Sunday. For now, it is the quote of the day, and we are. Who's our sponsor today there, Greg? We are brought to you today by Clutch Nutz. Looking to make a bold move? Grab a handful of Clutch Nutz. Those are tasty, delicious. Mix nuts in a bag. Put them in your pocket. Put them in your backpack. Whenever you're needing to make a bold choice. Clutch Nutz first. We'll give you the clutch you need. So, that brings us into the quote today. Along the same lines, our quote today comes from one Malcolm Gladwell, famous author of books like The Tipping Point and Outliers, kind of giving 21st century a new look on how we do things. Kind of one of our modern philosophers, I guess you could say. Yeah, that quote from Malcolm Gladwell is, if we are to learn to improve the quality of the decisions we make, we need to accept the mysterious nature of our snap judgments. And that one caught my eye today. It kind of caught my eye because I feel like I get stuck in a mode of not doing this, of not kind of trusting your gut, your snap decisions. It seems like a weird thing because why wouldn't you kind of do what your body is telling you to do? Even though your deeper brain might be telling you something different, but our kind of whole species, our kind of all evolution is built on instinct, right? And so I don't know. It seems strange that as like a conscious being versus in nature where everything is based on instinct, that we've kind of foregone that for higher thought and whatnot, which is great in most cases. It probably keeps us from killing each other and for the most part, keeps us from killing each other and snapping at each other and having crazy jealous rage and those types of things. This quote it brings up an interesting point in that in order to improve the decision making, we have to actually make the decisions, in order to learn if it was good or bad. And we also never really know our true reactions to whatever the outcome is, because we never actually took that action in the first place. So you're kind of just left with a mess of infinite possible coulda, woulda, shoulda moments running through your mind, and kind of just ends up driving you nuts. And then this gets compounded when other people are acting in the same way, right? We're not basically being honest with I want to say being honest. We're basically, we're ignoring what nature is kind of telling us about each other or a situation, and letting our brain kind of take a few more moments to think things through. Again, which can be good in most scenarios. But again, when you're talking about emotional things, including stuff like creative endeavors and things like that, a lot of times your first instinct is your best instinct. Like they say, even when taking tests, and you go back and you guess yourself on an answer or something like that, and you end up having the first answer right. It makes you wonder why you went back and changed it. What made you not trust that you knew the answer in the first place? Yeah, I kind of looked into this a little bit as far as if there's if there's any science behind any of it, and it turns out there is actually. I didn't know this. Apparently, there are like 100 trillion microorganisms in our gut. Like, they're not part of our cell structure. They're separate organisms that have like made their way in there through food and other things that we've put in our body, and they've just been filtered out and filtered in and whatnot. And like again, like there's 100 trillion of them. That's 10 times more than the actual cells in our body, and 100 times more than our brain cells. And these things are like in constant sort of they're in constant interaction with our gastrointestinal tract, our GI tract, and that GI tract is like a really complicated system that is constantly sending brain activity, or is constantly sending information to our brain. I mean, just like anything, but the gut, more than any other part of our body, is interacting with our brain and adapting our decisions. Again, I didn't know this, but 95% of the serotonin in our body is stored in the gut, which when you think about how like antidepressants work and stuff, is they target serotonin in the brain, whereas that's only 5% of the serotonin generation in our body. So if that's what you're trying to moderate, you're kind of looking in the wrong place, because again, 95% of this stuff is being released in our gastrointestinal tract, and these hundreds of trillions of microbes are like millimeters away from this place where all the serotonin sits. And so it makes sense that the things that we eat, which influences these microbes and whatnot, it changes our emotions, it changes our habits, it changes just the way we feel overall. But I mean, the more I got into it, the more it was just like about how it kind of interacts with our food, and how that has built sort of over the last 100 years of where we have been, sharing food from different places that we never had access to before. We are processing food differently and stuff like that. It has changed kind of our organisms that are sitting in our guts, over time, very quickly actually. Like I said, in the last couple 100 years. So it kind of just stayed along those lines as far as how what we're consuming is affecting these microbes, and thus affecting things like our serotonin levels and other brain activity. But I was more interested in what what about the gut feeling that, as you're leaving somebody's house that you have spent the night with or something makes you turn around and go back? Something like more like our human interactions, right? What makes us speak our mind when we normally wouldn't, or what makes us, clam up even though we know we should say something, whether it's something that's making us angry or something that's making us feel good, or like whatever the case is. Um, when we have these sort of gut feeling moments between each other, again, if we don't actually act on them, we'll never know what actual decisions or non-decisions or feelings end up arising from it. And like I said, you end up with just this cycle of possibilities. Like everybody does, right? This cycle of possibilities of like, well, what if I had followed that feeling? To kind of relate it more to a career level, I watched a super interesting talk with a guy named Magnus Walker, who ran a clothing company called Sirius, that he started basically just kind of moving out to California and selling T-shirts that he had like made and modified on the street, or gotten it at garage sales and secondhand stores, not on the street, on the beach, where there was a pretty like big culture of doing stuff like that. But it ended up growing into this huge clothing line called Sirius, and then they ended up morphing into film location, and then morphing into now like making documentary films and stuff like that. And so and this talk with Magnus Walker, he just talked about how everything was just kind of like a gut feeling, and none of it really made any sense, and we never really went into anything with any sort of plan. It was, make clothes that we would like to wear, and yeah, we need a bigger space, so let's go move into this space. And oh, people think this space is cool and want to film here. Okay, well, oh, a lot of people think it's cool and want to film here. Okay, well, maybe we can just do that. And it's kind of, he said an interesting thing where like when it feels awkward, that's probably when you know you're on the right track. And it's those awkward moments that a lot of times make people, step away from something. A moment of uh, in business or something like that. If you're just kind of starting out, and you're kind of feeling a moment of, well, is this really working? Goes back to like the test question, right? Like, trust yourself, trust the first answer that you came up with, um, because it was probably your best answer. And I'm not saying that it all the time works out when you trust your gut. Like, that's obviously not the case. But if there's kind of anything to really trust about what you're doing as you're kind of trying to navigate yourself through whatever we're doing here, who what better than to trust the way that you actually feel, versus basically basically anything anybody else will ever tell you, right? It seems kind of strange. I mean, obviously we need to and can learn from each other, but those things will play into your gut decision too, right? Like, if you have a friend that you respect that gives you advice about something, that's going to play into how you actually feel about it, because whether they changed your mind, or whether the fact that somebody you care about feels differently about it, all of those things are going to influence what is ultimately what you feel to be the right decision. But I mean, you could say that you could say that isn't a gut decision at that point. You're considering other people's viewpoints and other people's options and stuff like that. But I think that's not really true, because in the end, regardless of how much you think about it, whether or not you went with what you felt like was the right decision versus what maybe other people were telling you might have been the right decision, or second guessed yourself, and because, well, that couldn't have been the right decision, it seems too crazy, so let's default to this safer position. those aren't necessarily the right choices, and that isn't following your gut, regardless of how much you end up thinking about it or talking about it. Something else I found interesting is, the mentality of people that end up moving out to Hollywood and stuff like that, still with, only like $100 in their pocket and stuff like that. I watched an interview with John Hamm from Mad Men, and he, when he was 25, I think he said he moved out to Hollywood with only $100 in his pocket. Shows up, just on the bus with like literally nothing, and starts looking for work, whatever it is, waiting tables, going on auditions, and just gets at it like right away. Because why? you know, in any rational sort of world, that decision makes no sense. But in the irrational world of John Hamm's gut and mind, he went for it. And when we hear those types of stories, it's inspirational for everybody else. And I think even those types of things play into our own gut feelings, because we see that people have done it, and then maybe it's not so scary, and then maybe our gut doesn't, our gut tells us that it is the better way to go, or it is the right decision. I think that's part of the reason why we end up looking up to celebrities and people like that, because we kind of recognize this like boldness and bravado in their decision that we wish we all sort of had. I think most of us do, and that's why we're more attracted to the type of celebrity that actually, that you can see that pathway versus people that have been lifted onto that pedestal by outside forces like parents and that type of thing. Those people, even when they're talented, they tend to have to work a lot harder to gain the respect of an overall audience, not necessarily their peers, but an overall audience. Anyways, I think that comes back to what I said before about how when people don't act on their snap decisions, or do, it ultimately influences how we do the same. All this stuff gets compounded upon itself, because again, especially in one-on-one interaction, it's like, well, if I'm not saying or doing or whatever my gut is telling me to do, whatever my brain is telling me to do, and you're not, then we're both kind of sitting here not really sure, right? And again, whether that's love or business or just sex or like whatever, like if you're sitting across the table from somebody and they're not really telling you what they're actually thinking or feeling, you'll never like the decisions that get made at that table are never going to be based on the real issues that people had with whatever was being discussed. Again, that could be a business choice. That could be whether or not you want to make 20,000 shirts versus 50,000 shirts for the next shipment. Well, if Jerry never raises his hand about how he thinks that it'd be better to kind of go halfway in between and do 30,000 because he's done the math on and he's more like, no, I'm new here. I don't really want to rock any boats. And then, he doesn't end up voicing himself. They end up going to that decision, a few months later anyways, once they've done the math for it. And Jerry is left there being like, oh, I had that idea. And everybody else is, well, should have said something. Sorry, like, you don't get credit for, I had that idea. You get credit for, I did. But yeah, so maybe we'll leave that for today. That again, a quote by Malcolm Gladwell. If we are to learn to improve the quality of the decisions we make, we need to accept the mysterious nature of our snap judgments. Malcolm Gladwell, he is a writer, kind of modern philosopher. And the key word there for me is mysterious. They're still mysterious, even as I went through TED Talks and stuff, trying to find some info on this type of gut feeling and stuff, it's still very much unknown, and I find that interesting. It opens more avenues for further discussions. So thanks again to Axel Boss. Thanks again to the Crooked Spies for providing their awesome music. Thanks again to Clutch Nutz. Looking to make a bold move? Grab a handful of Clutch Nutz. They will give you the clutch feeling you need when you are in a high-pressure situation. They're good for your backpack, for your pocket, for your sock, and for your mouth. It's Clutch Nutz. This has been Slackline Quote of the Day broadcast. You have been listening to The Boss.
The boss is coming!
That's a made-up dumb fairy tale name, you
And we are out for today. We will be back tomorrow with a brand new quote. Hope everybody has a good day. Bye for now.